your mind shifted a little bit a few years ago in terms of how you're serving, and you wanted to be of more service to the landowner, and you saw kind of a shift happening. And I'd love for you to share kind of how that was sparked for you originally, and then how that
Sure.
is playing today out and what we see.
Yeah, a shift in identifying what I foresaw then and do now as a risk of the exploration of sort of traditional revenue streams that have made a lot of this land possible for many generations is terming out well over a century of land was settled for the purpose of cultivating agriculture. And then it was made possible early in the 20th century by oil and gas production in a lot of regions. A lot of those revenue sources, for various reasons, um, again, I think we talked about we're losing the baby boomer generation. A lot of these trade skills are not being passed down, maybe like they used to. Rural communities are not necessarily in a period of attraction as they are in people are migrating out. Um, and certainly in West Texas, where we're seeing problems with the aquifer in terms of recharge and extraction. And even some of the financial data that we've looked at about whatever is causing the pivot we're going through in the climate, whether it's industrial or whether it's just environmental, doesn't really make any difference to me. It's drier and hotter. It's getting a lot harder to cultivate property to make a living to hold on to it. And that's going to be very important when the next generation takes it over here very, very soon. How are you going to satisfy maintenance of property for people that no longer live on it and no longer make money off of it, which has been in generations past. Certainly my grandparents were able to do that. That's not necessarily possible. And a lot of these properties are going up for sale. And for the first time, because those reasons apply to all other landowners, they're not being purchased by other farmers and ranchers and landowners nearby. They're being purchased by outside interests. And a lot of these properties that I've seen, people that have come to me that are either neighbors or acquaintances, sometimes clients, sometimes people that we've crossed with transmission or pipelines or taken leases on, are going through this evolution and are between finding enough money to make the property sustainable or putting it up for sale. And as we talked about, prices in Texas are ranging from 3,500 to 10,000 to 20,000 an acre. Brent and I both, visited yesterday that when we were young, we had the dream about buying that 100, 200, 300 acre ranch in Texas. That's going to run you a cool $2, $3 million now without improvements.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of people either can afford or if they can are willing to spend that kind of money for secondary rural property. And so they're going to corporate interests, usually sometimes outside the community and oftentimes outside the state. And that bothers me. And I think it's important to keep interest local and certainly statewide is how can we bring as many opportunities for landowners in rural areas. 65% of the state is classified as working. That's either ag, forestry, or cattle country to generate enough money so that they could keep property and so can their heirs without having to support it from outside collateral income. And that's when I really started seeing and sort of surrendering. I'm an oil and gas guy, or I'm a renewable guy, or I'm a carbon storage guy. I really want to explore all these opportunities from this sort of local security standpoint so that we could, if there's a potential for one of these energy sources to make money for landowners, I want to be sure we're bringing these opportunities to each and every one of them. And thus, that's kind of how our career, my career and my companies have evolved is from that standpoint. And we've surrendered a lot of the political lobby because we don't necessarily bat for one industry over the other. If it makes money and it's deployable commercially, I really want to see what applications there are all over the state for the benefit of the state. People live there.
Yeah. I think that's we've seen a shift in that. And I echo everything that Jonathan says. I mean, the best thing about, rural America is the sense and the feel of community. And when people can't afford to keep property that's been in their family for multiple generations, that's where you start to lose community. And to Jonathan's point, how we've all had the dream of owning property. I think that's the American dream, own your business, build your career, own some land, own a
Yeah.
home, all that. And that's been a big push of ours. And we're working on behalf of alternative energy companies as landmen to educate landowners on, hey, this is a mechanism that can provide a revenue stream that can allow this land to stay in your family. Oftentimes we're dealing with people who, baby boomer generations, right? They're looking at the next 5 to 10 years of, what do I do with this property? They're at the end of life. They're maybe wanting to pass it on,
Yeah.
and they either have kids or don't have kids that can afford it. And if they can't afford to maintain that property or afford the taxes
Yeah.
when it changes hands, the alternative and energy development is a mechanism for them to be able to sustain that property, to Jonathan's point, in their family. Um, and we've seen a shift. The more we can talk to landowners and help show that there are opportunities out there, the more that these companies, from the business side, recognize that there are
Yeah.
multiple ways that you can develop a piece of land. I mean, we're negotiating and working on projects in Southeast Texas right now, where we're negotiating with a landowner who's got a CCUS lease in place. Um, they're looking at a solar development over the top of that. Had a great conversation between a
Yeah.
solar developer and a CCUS developer. Uh, Again, trying to encourage that collaboration, and we're doing all that on behalf of the landowner. And this is land that's been in this family's name for 4 or 5 generations. This is going to
Yeah.
provide financial security for them. Instead of growing rice, they're growing solar panels and harvesting and holding CCUS, and that land's going to stay in their family. That's starting to become more commonplace, and people are starting to recognize that as a means to sustain their
Yeah.
property. And that's ultimately what you want to see. And I think anybody can get
Well,
behind that.
I think from a practical standpoint too, and I've seen this in sort of dual energy sources, and I think you'll see it evolve to even more, is rather than one company getting the solar rights and one company getting the carbon storage rights and one having the oil and gas lease and one doing the wind and one getting the lithium rights, you're starting to see leases evolve where oil and gas companies they're including the lithium. I think you'll see, I've suggested in several occasions finding solar leases in place and modify them to include carbon storage rights. Is I think you'll start to see lease forms where companies would be intelligent to go ahead and lease everything. To lease solar, have a negotiation clause in there for solar, carbon storage, lithium, oil and gas. It's going to be problematic in the early stages because companies they're not designed that way. But as they evolve, it's going to make a lot of sense to just go ahead and address concurrent development right out of the chute, because you are seeing multiple entities that now have rights above and below each other. It would be best to just get one lease that covers all of them. Then you can trade those things out as you see fit as the leaseholder, if you're a company. Because to your point, that's the sort of hybrid concurrent we're seeing, is a lot of these larger landowners are entertaining solar, carbon storage, maybe oil and gas if they're in the Eagle Ford and Permian. So they've got 3 or 4 things on their plate already. It makes sense to just give them one form, one document agreement with one company. I think you'll start to see that. I think you already are.
Absolutely. And that was a big, I mentioned the conversation I had with the 2 companies last week. That was driven by the landowner's request. The landowner says, look, I've got this agreement in place with company A for CCUS development. I do not want to impede that. I made a deal with these people. I want to do this solar development as well, but I need you 2 guys to talk. I need y'all to get on the same page, and I need to make sure, for our solar development client, that we have the proper language to allow that co-development. And the conversation that we set up was great. It could be a whole other podcast, but it was all centered around, what do you need? How do you need to develop your asset? Mr. CCUS company, and then the CCUS companies are, how do you need to develop your solar project? And a lot of factors come into play there. We talked about, the site location for the injection wells, the monitoring wells that happen on CCUS projects. The other big takeaway was we needed to account for language for the seismic that needs to be shot on those CCUS projects every
Yeah.
4 or 5 years. And that was a whole other factor that the solar company had not considered. Where are those trucks going to need to go? Has seismic been shot over this already? What were those paths, for your shaker
Yeah.
trucks and everything? And the more informed and the farther that conversation went, the more clarity that our solar development client had on how they maybe needed to go about structuring their lease with the landowner. And we actually left it at the end where there's potential partnership from a B2B standpoint between the two companies for power purchasing and all those things. So,
Yeah, that's great. Those
yeah,
are resolutions I like to hear.